Today, you are lucky because you are about to listen to a badass episode. Today's guest, Kiana Pierre-Louis, or KPL as her students call her, is a professor at Bentley University, my alma mater, and is also the co-creator of the new Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion major at Bentley, which is the first ever at a business university and may very well be the first ever across the board of a major all around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So in this episode, we talk about Kiana's incredible journey of her path that has been led by nudges and intuitive moments from the universe to move her along her path to this incredibly powerful position she's in right now. And I already know there's so much more that's to come. So if you are somebody that is interested, eager, or even involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts somewhere in your life, whether it be at work or in your communities, this episode is for you. Kiana talks about the work and the approach, and pretty much offers a blueprint on how you can bring diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts into the organization or the community that you're a part of. She talks about her experience of bringing this through to a business university, which so often is being like, I always think about it like Shark Tank, where you're going to get things, holes poked everywhere as the potential for something to come to fruition in the way that you'd like for it to. So if you are somebody that is advocating for diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts somewhere in your life, please listen to this episode. It will be so helpful for you. Also, we talk about not just the work that she's done and the incredible work she's done at Bentley University and beyond and before, but we also talk about the work that she is doing in her hometown, the local work, the local advocacy, and the reasons why she has stepped into these positions of influence and advocacy in her hometown. And so I hope you, if you are somebody that in the last 2 years, your hometown has had to grapple with the Black Lives Matter, has had to grapple with diversity in any kind of way, has had to grapple with any of the elements of social injustice that have been coming to a head during the pandemic. I hope you listen to this episode because Kiana talks about how she's navigated the dynamics within her hometown and also created a path forward for her, not only for her and the people that she's worked alongside, but also for the other people in her town to come together and actually connect on their humanity to create a future that actually allows each and every one of us to understand what an inclusive future looks like and work together to move towards it. And then finally, we talk about so many things, so let me not just act like there's 3 things, but one of the pieces at the end that just rocked my world is that one of the courses that Kiana offers is a travel course, and it is all about bringing students that are learning about social justice in the classroom into real life lived experience with the historic elements of American history and going to the places where it happened. And so I hope if you are somebody that is eager to extend your education, you listen to that particular part of it too. You don't need to be a college student to be able to have a level of education of just literally stepping in the shoes of the giants that came before us from regards to civil rights and equality initiatives. And so I really encourage you to have a listen to this episode, share it with your friends. If you have had a hard time having conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, if you have a hard time with even understanding what the difference between those 3 things are and so much more, you're not alone. We talk about that in this episode too. But I really encourage you to use this episode as a starting point, as a conversation starter with people in your life that you want to have more conversations about this with. And to just, normalize the fact that we are all in this together. And the only way forward is for each and every one of us to be able to create time and space for us to be able to really explore what each and every element of this means to each of us. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Kiana, welcome to Checkbox Other. We've been nerding out even before we started on this, and I'm just so excited that you are here right now. So welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm so happy you're here. So I've got to calm my face down too. I'm smiling too hard. So let's start with my favorite thing to ask everybody.
Yep.
Pass the mic and give us a quick notes. No, not. Can I get the question out? Give us a Cliff Notes version of your journey. Twists, turns, aha moment, anything that you feel like helps kind of inform the journey that you've had to get you to where we are today and all the wonderful stuff we're going to be talking about.
Oh, I love that. I love this question. Because there's been twists and turns. So went to Bentley, that's my alma mater, went to a business school, but funny, I always knew that I was going to law school, right? So I went to Bentley knowing I was going to law school.
Really?
Back in the day, I think as you know, there was no law program.
Yeah.
So I went off to law school, and to be honest, I thought that I was going to be a couple things. Civil rights attorney, right? I just knew that was my passion. I was going to eventually be a judge. And I was going to do all those things. I didn't do any of them.
That's okay.
So I ended up doing criminal defense. Because in my young mind, so I graduated law school early. So I graduated law school about 24. I went like right. So Bentley Law School, Suffolk. Um, and at 24 in my brain, I thought I could conquer this kind of notion of social justice, this criminal justice, lack of a better word. I can do that by being a defense attorney, right? I grew up in Dorchester, so I was like, I'm gonna represent my people. Well, I learned really quickly that when you're within the walls of the system, you can't really fight the system. You're just really fighting within. So it ended up started to be daunting on me, to be honest with you. I loved criminal defense. I loved every moment of it, but it just started to really weigh on my heart because I think it was a little too close to home. Like I was defending people around the corner, kind of in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
So oddly enough, I actually did that for about a year out of law school. And then I said, you know what, I'm going to go out on my own and do my own firm.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, that's young Kiana, right? So I did that, thinking I can do this. So I still took a little bit of a criminal defense because that's what I knew. But I also actually interned, had some work in the civil litigation and corporate field, right? Again, let me just note, I said I would never do that. Nah, I don't want to do corporate or civil. I want to be a litigator. I want to run my mouth in court, right? Defend people. But again, I opened up my firm with a partner. And when you open up your firm, you take in any case that's coming your way. So I ended up being a general practitioner for a while. And so did she. Finally, when we really became good and became kind of popular and people started coming, we had consistent clients. I actually took a whole left on my path. I ended up really focusing on the civil side, the civil litigation side, and the corporate side, right? The real part that I said I didn't want to go to law school for. Yeah. But I ended up being really good at the corporations part, dealing with all types of organizations, nonprofits, LLC. And I was really good. Real estate became a little bit of a passion of mine, right? So when you're a lawyer, you can also become a real estate broker, right? You don't have to take that long test. We already just got a doctorate. Right? We got the Esquire. So they were like, you don't have to take a test. So me and my partner, who was my best friend, we decided, let's just open up a brokerage. We were losing our mind. Nikki, we were losing our mind.
Like, doesn't sound busy at all. No.
No, not at all. We had a law firm, a brokerage, running. We were around that time with the whole housing boom and all that, right? So here comes 2008, crash our bubble. I still did corporate work. I was still really good at corporate work. She was still doing divorces and some of that type of work. She had kids first. I came in second, and the journey and it's just funny. I always tell my students now, you just follow the path, because my daughter, she was born first. She's 12 now, but she ended up having sickle cell. Okay. So that kind of put a little bit of, you have to be there and be a mother. You don't know what this thing called sickle cell is going to bring. So I'm researching and all this, but then come to find out when she's about 10 months, I find out she's allergic to milk, eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, coconut, fish. I'm like, what do I do?
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So I have this baby with sickle cell, this baby with all these allergies, this firm that you're trying to keep afloat, right? You have to actively go and find clients. It's small. So my partner and I we sat down, and we just had this conversation about, do we want to keep this firm? Do we want to keep it afloat? What do we want to do? At that same time, divine intervention, I came back to Bentley for the Martin Luther King breakfast. Yeah. And my mentor, Dr. Avery, was like, I think the law department has an opening. And I was like, really? So I met with the chair. He was like, come meet with me, come have an interview. We'll see if you can do it. I'm thinking, I am a litigator. Like, I am a trial attorney. I don't know anything about it. So I sit down, I go meet the chair of the law department at the time. He doesn't even interview me. All he got was Dr. Avery's word. And he was like, you're hired. So I'm hired to teach a marketing law class. And I'm like, I know intellectual property, that's the work I did, but teach. Long story short, I ended up teaching marketing law first and fell in love with teaching. It just
Yes.
was a different blessing on taking my knowledge and maybe not applying in a legal way and defending or whatever, litigating for clients, but it was taking that and teaching the students in a practical way what we really do or what it means to be a lawyer. And I fell in love with it. So because of that, they gave me more classes. I was still part-time for a while. And then we shut down the firm. We did. We just shut it down because it was a battle with my babies, her babies. So we shut it down. But now I'm just a part-time professor, right? And we don't get much, right? But I kind
Mhm.
of knew that burden. I was still taking a little bit of law cases, not under a firm, but personally. And then my passion somewhat collided. So a class called Race in the Law came up. And they were like, we know that you kind of have this back. We know you want to be a civil rights. We know that you kind of research and work into that and that you're an advocate. I was a social justice advocate out in my neighborhood. And
Yeah.
so they were like, do you want to take it? So I took the class, looked at the syllabus, changed everything, and taught it. And that has been a popular class since at Bentley, right? And it's
Yes.
and a notion at a business school, something called race in the law, to be popular as an elective in a law department, right?
Mhm.
It really was the students saying, why didn't I not learn this? Why am I
Yeah.
not under, because it's a clash between history based on this notion of race and how the laws and policies really affected that, right? And because as the students kept feeding and saying, we didn't know that, that just me really started doing all the social justice work that I do at this point. So I created another class called Social Justice Law, and the maid, all this stuff that I just really started. I ended up not being a civil rights attorney, but taking my legal knowledge and my legal knowledge really in like corporate and HR, and making this spin on this notion on what is diversity, equity, inclusion, what is social justice, what does it mean to organizations, and how can I effectuate that at a business school.
Yeah.
So that's the shortest way I can say my path and journey. So what reality is, it wasn't exactly what I thought for myself, but it is exactly where I should and want to be. So
Yes. I love so much that path reference of just like the nudges that were coming from
yes,
all different places. And you're like, okay, I guess I'll go with this nudge. Let's see where it leads me. Even though I was like scratching and clawing and saying, no way do I ever want to do that. Okay, I guess I'm supposed to at least do some time over here and see what it tells me. Fine.
right.
Let me see what the corporate world tells me. So, okay, all right, fine. And then
Yep.
it's like, oh, I didn't realize there were all these gems and these nuggets of wisdom over here that if I didn't take this step over in this direction, I never would have seen in the way that I was able to see it. It's
You
really
said it
powerful.
perfectly. That was
Yeah.
actually really perfect the way you said that. Yeah, it was these
Yeah.
gems and nuggets that you don't know why you're getting them, but they're setting you up for something. That was actually
Yeah.
perfect.
And it's funny because a lot of the people I work with in coaching too, it's like this feeling of, especially if they're thinking about pivoting, it's like, well, if I'm going to pivot, I have to find the perfect next step. And I'm always like, okay, let's take that perfect off of ourselves because there is no such thing. And we keep
Correct.
thinking that. And so even if something is like perfect for you in the moment, you're not going to be able to see it through all of the other criteria you provide. And so really, I think there is so much self-trust that comes through in your story that so often we are not told to cultivate and we are not
Mhm.
encouraged to honor what we can't see and what we didn't have on our 5 to 10 year plan already. And so there's just so much willingness to trust that you are able, even if it's not
Yeah.
something you thought you were going to do, that you can step into that space and make it work. And even thinking about how you just talked about creating again, when I graduated from Bentley, I mean, I'm sure there were law classes. I did not know. I thought when I was growing up, I wanted to be a lawyer. I
Yeah.
did not know that was something that you could do at Bentley, honestly, until like later years. There's a lot of things about Bentley that I'm like, wait, that was there when I was what? And now obviously there's so much more. But
Yeah.
the part of like even just going into a class that has been created and a curriculum that has been created and looking at it and saying, okay, not necessarily the arc I'd go, but thank you so much for these starting points and let me create what I think will actually
Yes.
create that journey that's helpful for the students here. Because I think so much of the conversation specifically about race in 2021, I know this is not in 2021, so much of it is that we get all these disparate elements that we're supposed to be able to create a path ourselves, and there's confusion, and there's obviously a whole lot of socialized propaganda over the centuries that we
Yes.
have to kind of parcel through. So I just think it's so wonderful, the kind of confidence and trust you had in yourself to be like, hey, so this isn't going to help us tell that story arc the way we need to be effective in the step that
Right.
we're hoping the students to be able to go out in the world and do. Okay.
And the one thing that
Oh,
I
go
just
ahead.
want to say about that is I
Yeah.
think also what is easier for me, because I know a lot of people in other disciplines try to bring it in, but what's easier for me and how we're taught as lawyers is we take it from the facts. Like they're reading the cases. I do not, they can guess maybe what I may think of my opinion, but I don't offer that to them. I make them make informed choices based on what they're reading, what they're seeing, what the law says. And it just, I love watching their brains, or when they're reading the case and they're looking at me and they're like, they call me KPL, they're like, make it make sense. And I'm like, I can't, I can't make it make sense.
You're like, does it make sense? How does it make sense to you? Or where does it stop
Yes,
making sense to you? That's even better. When does it stop making sense and how can we start to connect
yes.
dots? Yeah, that's
And I
so
love
cool.
that. So I love them getting to their own point on their own.
Yeah. And again, that is how we learn. I feel
Yeah.
like there is so much, there have been other episodes, and any person that's talked to me about education in general, I feel like what we realize is that we've been taught a certain way to learn. And
Mhm.
then we go out into the world and the world isn't set up the way that we learned.
Yep.
It's not flashcards. Life is not flashcards. Life is not memorization for those 30 minutes that you need to take that test and forgetting after. You need to
Yep.
actually accumulate knowledge to be able to operate in real life situations. And so the ability to create that space for kids, I shouldn't say kids, students, to be able to actually create their own critical thinking cap, their
Yeah.
own ability to like problem solve and see how all different elements come together is just such a wonderful gift.
Yeah.
All right. So my favorite question, why we call this checkbox other,
Yep.
is I would love for you to tell me a time, if you have more than one time, feel free to go wild on it, where you have felt other or different or as though you didn't belong in life and how that's kind of impacted your path.
Okay. I'm gonna just keep it real. So I'm gonna the one that I think sticks out the most to me happened at Bentley, as a professional.
Mm,
So had an opportunity to kind of lead a task force, right? It was there's always a curriculum overhaul. So it was the curriculum overhaul, which, I'm a lecturer. So as a lecturer, it's a little weird, a little different, but I was able to lead it. It was a co-chair, which was shocking, but I was like, I'm going to take it and go on. And I remember, you know, that imposter syndrome that we get sometimes
oh yeah.
being a woman of color. I remember having that, but I remember going, you can do this. You're going to put your 100 in it. So was doing a good job, but then we had to have meetings with a group of other professors. And I think there was probably like 15 in the room at the time. And I walked in with my co-chair, who was a white male, and we really started working good together. And we sat down and we started asking questions, getting some feedback. And I remember at first thinking, interesting, every time somebody spoke, they spoke to him. They addressed the question to him. And I would even interject to see if they're going to say something to me. They didn't. They wouldn't look at me. These are people that I know too. Some people that I have worked with.
Yeah.
They only, like specifically, they would say his name and address him, never address him. And I remember sitting there for an hour going, oh, wow. Right? And there was a million things going on. Are you doing it because I'm a woman? Are you doing it because I'm relatively younger in this? Are you doing it because of my rank? Just a minute, are you doing it because I'm Black? Like there's just so many. So I remember walking out and I wanted to do that pulse check. I knew what was going on, but I just wanted to know, did he recognize it?
Yeah.
So I asked him, I said, did you just know? And before I got it out, he was like, if somebody had said that to me and I wasn't in the room, I might have given excuses. He was like, I'm not going to lie, that white man, I might have been like, no. But he was like, as I sat and watched,
Yeah.
he was like, it was clear. And I was like, okay. Like, I just was like, okay. And I want to know because some of the people in the room, I had a somewhat good relationship. Others, we never really addressed me. But I have never felt, I am leading this with him. We are equals. And you couldn't even address me. So yeah, you talk about you talk about not feeling like you belong. Me
Yeah.
already feeling like an imposter in that situation, it didn't, it didn't feel good. It did not.
No.
And then it makes you have this little chip on your shoulder, like makes you want to be seen. And I realized it is not a me problem,
Yeah.
it's a them problem. And I can't continue to run my work and my life based on others' problems. So, but it hurt for a while. It stung for a
Oh,
little
for
while, but
sure.
that is the easiest and the best one that sticks out in my head.
It's so funny. I feel that through my whole body, first of all.
Mhm,
And
mm,
I wish there's a part of me that could like go back in time and just like sit next to you and just be like, you know what? I'm not going to interject. You're not by yourself. I see this, in the same
thank you.
way that I think having that gut check outside of it is like, okay, I wasn't alone, even though in that moment I felt alone and there wasn't really, I mean, there's nothing you could have done to shift that. You tried, you
Right.
interjected, you participated. And it's funny because I actually participated in a panel discussion, an alumni panel discussion at Bentley as
Mm,
well, professional. It was I think it must have been all Bentley alums, and it was about entrepreneurship. And the same exact dynamic happened. It was me, one other, so there was somebody that's supposed to be there and he was sick, so he wasn't there. But the
yeah.
two other men on the panel with me were two white men. One white man, we'll say two white men. We'll say white passing men one way or another. And
Okay.
again, uh, it was really interesting because people had come in to hear about how to step into an entrepreneurial space in kind of an unconventional path. And the
Yeah.
exact same thing happened to the point where I mean, again, I feel like we're very similar. Like even as a little kid, I was like, oh, you just about to forgot.
I'm
How are you?
here.
Right. I was like, I have something to say. Hi, how are you? Or like, somebody asked a question and there was kind of a bit of like a softball. Well, I shouldn't say softball. Kind of a bit of like I'm not going to, it's a non-answer answer to it to just
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
make
yeah.
it through. And I was like, I'll take it. Like, let me go and be real and be raw about this because starting your own business, as you know, like it's not pretty.
No.
We see it on the outside and we see the highlight reels, but there's a whole lot of this that if you're really interested in doing this, you need to know that there's so much else. But if you're not going to give the people that have a voice in the in the experience and expertise in the experience the opportunity to even share with you, you're doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah.
Aside from the fact of you kind of canceling their existence and silencing their existence just because you're uncomfortable or maybe
Uncomfortable. Yep.
or you don't know how to handle, like you're not really sure what's going to be said back to you because again, what we're so used to consuming is through the white male lens. And so if
Mhm.
you're used to asking a question and hearing the expert be a white male on screen or a white male talking head, then you kind of have a feeling and a sense of how that goes. And so if there is somebody that appears different to you and you're like, okay, I want to ask this question, but I don't want to ask it wrong, or I don't really know, maybe that's not what I see as my journey forward. It's such an interesting, I always encourage people in those situations. I'm like, witness yourself. Like it's
Yeah.
okay because so often so much of this is outside of our kind of conscious awareness. It doesn't necessarily mean that because it's outside our conscious awareness, we should just surrender to it. And so there is so much power, I think, in having witnessing the experience, having somebody else next to you and being in such a wonderful position to be able to kind of gut check with them. But I also find it so fascinating the part where you knew at least half of that room. And that's kind of its own mental gymnastics to be able to continue
Yes.
relationships after that.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, everything you just said was brilliant. Like, I really wanted to be like, I want to record you and see how you, all these well-meaning people, I don't have issues, how you just reacted to me being in this position. Like how you just could not even address me. People that we are on the first name, but you could not even address me. There were people that I knew has always had issues, but
Yeah,
you
right.
just not. It was shocking, and yes, there's like that too, Kiana. Do you want me to be the Kiana that's gonna be like, hello?
Yeah, right.
Not
Yeah,
him, but then I was like, okay.
yeah.
Let me just, we had a purpose. We needed to get the information on the curriculum and
Right. The kind of the real-time reprioritization too, right? You talked about the imposter syndrome is stepping in that room, all of the kind of internal dynamics yourself, the work you're proposing, right? That you're like,
mm-hmm.
I want to get this to a point where it can be supportive for everybody. So where are my
Yep.
priorities here? Is my priority to be treated like the full human being that I am? or should I be taking that down so that, like, how is my humanity part of this dynamic right now? We're trying to figure out how to create a curriculum that works. How did that become part of this shuffle that I need to
Right,
figure out how to prioritize? How has that
right.
become my job? And
My issue, right?
yeah, and weight that I have to carry when really I'm carrying the weight by co-chairing, leading, and trying to make this thing happen.
Correct. But
Yeah.
there was always, and I had to tell my co-chair, there is a weight that I always have to carry that you never do.
Yeah.
And I need you. That was one facet of it. There are going to be many others, and there was,
Yeah.
you know, he questioned me. He asked me one day about my hairstyle. Was I going to wear my hair like this, like this? And I was like, no. Now I'm going to wear it bigger because
Yeah. You're like, are you gonna wear your let's not talk about your hair, sir. Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. And it really is. I mean, the permission that is given and granted by just the assimilation that we have from the things around us is crazy, because so often we don't have the opportunity or the encouragement to interrupt it when it is so bizarre. When you can like
Yep,
take it out and be like, did you really intend to do that? Oh, I didn't even realize it just came out because I've learned that from other things, or it's what I'm concerned about this. And so it means that it's okay for me to talk about your hair. What? No. Let's talk about the work we're doing here. Okay.
yes,
Why are we distracted by
yes,
that?
yes.
Oh, yeah, God. So feeling it all of my body. I'm like, my legs are I'm like, should we get up? Should we walk around? We need to work some of this out of our body. My goodness. Oh, well, okay. Speaking of this, well, my goodness,
Mm.
it's like you had the questions before or something. So you are one of the co-creators of Bentley's new diversity, equity, and inclusion major. I will tell
Wow.
you the volume with which I screamed in excitement when I saw this news. I feel like people could have heard me from like towns and towns away. So
Mhm.
Bentley just came out last year, right?
Yep.
Last year with a diversity, equity, and inclusion major, kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, I mean, graduating from this school, that when I went to Bentley, it was 30% women. And I'm pretty sure that the racial dynamic percentage has been really in the single digits for the most part anyway. So it's a pretty homogenous, mainly white male institution. And
Yes.
historically, that's where that was where Bentley started. And so I find it just so fascinating to think about the fact that, like, yes, Bentley has come very far from where it started. And also there is definitely room to grow and room to become more inclusive, and definitely we'll talk data, more diverse, right?
Yeah.
So how can you talk about like how how this came about as kind of the major, I mean, just honestly, like I'm like looking a little, I don't know, like I feel like a fan of like the Beatles or something. I'm so excited about this right now. So that there is it, the spark of this idea, the
Yeah.
interest of making this come to fruition, and then also communicating it out in such a time where we're in the midst of really larger cultural conversations around what diversity, equity, and inclusion are. I would love to kind of hear how that all happened, key milestones, but also if however much you're willing to share. But I just find it so fascinating as somebody that has lived and breathed on campus
Yeah.
and knows the importance of the power that you have going into the world with a Bentley degree. Having a DEI degree specifically coming out of Bentley is like, oh yes. So I'd
Yeah.
love to hear how that all came to be.
So it was like this catalysm of just like it just worked out, to be honest. Like I want to be like brilliant. I had this strategic. No. So for a while now, I have taken this kind of non-official kind of spot at Bentley on being like the social justice advocate, this DNI. And it could be a lot of the classes, and it really is a lot of I will advocate the health of these kids because we needed it, right? There was few and far between when we were on campus. And I know, let me just give you one story and I'll get back to this. I remember that I was teaching a class and it was kind of this, I think it was like the class of 2015. They came in and they came in through the STEP program and they were, it was a group of them and they were told to take me. They'll get a professor of color, which was rare, especially there's none in the law department. So, and I remember I finished teaching and this Black girl walked up to me and just was like, can I hug you? And I was like, oh my God, I'll be sure. And she goes, I have never been in the class where I saw me, somebody like me. And I completely lost my
Yep.
that same class, I got a transgender student of color. And it was this awakening of, okay, Bentley, you are getting these students that now are we prepared to handle their needs? Okay. I don't know if you're addressing their needs because they are by numbers, the minority students, they're not, coming big. Are you handling them? So I became this official, like there was lines, okay, around the door, and I would advocate, but also advocating for Bentley just to do better. So for a while, I had been thinking about starting a social justice center on Bentley. And I knew that I had to be strategic about it because to start a center at Bentley, it had to do something. So I was really going to do it around research and really have students come in on based on this notion of social justice, because it taps everything. It taps every facet of business, how they want to research it and create it and what can we use and do it with Bentley. I never really fleshed it out. I thought about it, and then some people started saying, well, aren't there centers on campus that do the same thing? And I'm like, yeah, this is what happens when you go. So I kind of put it on the back burner. I had classes to deal with, but it was always on my mind. And then I was like, you know what about a major or a minor? Like, what about this major or minor or social justice DEI? At that same time, my co-creators, the two, Ann Rawls and Gary David, they're out of the sociology department, were somewhat thinking about it. They were thinking on a different trajectory. We have an LSM, which is a legal study, not a legal, no, I just said that wrong, liberal studies major, where business students can take this LSM and add a liberal studies major on something out of, the arts and sciences. So they controlled the one for diversity in society. And I worked with them because I had some diversity in society classes. So they have been thinking of taking that kind of model and making it a major. So I think they started working on it. And then, given at this time, I was working on my own. They were working on it well before George Floyd. George Floyd happens. Pandemic happens. The world notices what we've been noticing for a very long time. But it was so many emotions with, different people. And I remember that people really started turning to me like, are you speaking out about this? And I remember thinking, how did I become the mouthpiece of this DEI work of Bentley? So we had listening sessions, everything that happened, what is going on with the students, Kiana, all this stuff. So Ann and Gary come to me and they're like, look, we have an idea. We want to do a major. And I fall out laughing. And they're like, what are you laughing for? And I'm like, I have a different model. So we meet and we combine about our thoughts, right? And, we take out some things, we combine it. My biggest thing was, I think we need to tap into alumni who are doing this work to really discuss what is the knowledge base we need, right? What is the knowledge base we need? So I had a couple that I reached out to, gave them like our framework. They, ripped it apart, talked about the knowledge base. But some of the things that really came to why we needed this, okay? Why we needed a diversity, equity, inclusion major. And it is a BA and the BS, so the students can choose. So we were in this new curriculum. We really wanted to give students choice. So we didn't want to force them into a BA or a BS. They can choose which trajectory they wanted based on it. The second thing for me was what I told Gary and Ann. I don't think that Bentley understands how many students are going out doing this work, but coming back to me as a mentor or advisor to be like, I don't know what I'm doing because I wasn't taught, right, at Bentley. So I had a student who went out and started a nonprofit around this work and was like, KPL, can you help me? Because I don't know what I'm doing. Right? I have the passion. I have so many students that are doing this, working either in small nonprofits, starting their own companies. And I was like, I get it now. We're not treating this as the discipline it is. DE&I work is a discipline. And what we're doing, and I'm seeing it now, is we are putting people in these positions based on identity, right? And that can cause harm. And I was like, we are a business school. We are trying to get the next leaders into this thing. Why are we not getting leaders out in diversity, equity, inclusion. And why are we not saying that this is a discipline, right?
Yep.
There are different frameworks, but it is a discipline that these students need to learn in order to go out to maybe one day be the chief diversity officer or director of diversity, or even in HR, right? Because
Yes.
HR is going to be the front line on this,
Yes.
or start a nonprofit. So we started doing this and we went to look out other models. Well, shocker.
Where are they?
One that had it in the arts and science, the rest were certificates. And I was like, this will not do.
Yeah.
So Bentley also had been talking about doing interdisciplinary, taking majors outside of departments and doing interdisciplinary. So now you have a lawyer with two sociologists, right? So we're really working together. So we decided we didn't want it in one department, plus we wouldn't have been able to decide, there's a mine.
Yeah.
And we made it an interdisciplinary major, and we made it a BA and a BS. And it was not, it was not easy. This is when, though, I would say, how we talked about this reasons, these nudges. This is when the imposter syndrome started to shut down for me. When I was like, you know what, Kiana, you keep thinking that you're not enough. You don't have enough. You're not doing enough. You always have to do more, even though you're doing 300%.
Yep.
It's still not enough, because that's how we have in this, based on this white male supremacist model, that's how we've been told, right?
Yep.
So I remember that we had to go around and start pitching it, right? Now, everybody in theory will nobody's going to say, don't do a D&I major, because it's not going to make it look good, right? So they're going to come with other things.
Yeah, let's poke holes somewhere else, but really mean that. Yeah.
So the first thing was, well, you're not really creating many classes. You have other classes. And I was like, but that is an attest to Bentley, right? And I was like, first of all, I did create a class, but there's an attest to Bentley that some of this work is being done, but it's scattered. And they're electives and students are not. So we had a lot of these classes. There is a lot of law classes that are dealing with, they're called outsiders in the law, race in the law, gender in the law, all these law classes. We have sociology, English. We had a famous management course, that's management and diversity, that damn near every student should be taking, right?
Yeah.
So we were wrapping those up into the major. So those are the required. And then the electives, depending if it's BA or BS, the electives on the BS will go through all the business classes that do this work. And then the BA would go through the arts and sciences that do this work. So a lot of the holes were like, well, you didn't really create, you're just molding together. And I was like, okay, but we're doing it. And some of us are doing it really good, brilliantly doing it. And now we're centering this work and focusing it. But also I did create a class because I have a big pet peeve by doing this work. And I think you probably have me. We lose these terms: diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, belonging, intersectionality, just bleh, and not understand what it is, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm. And they all mean the same thing at some point.
All mean the same thing.
No, they don't.
No, they do not. And I am big on, all right, if you're going to go out there and do this work, however you're going to do it, you need to understand the core concepts of what this is and whatever. So I have a class, not just around those, but all the terminology, but also, how do you have these difficult conversations? So these students, they are going to have to learn, right? I'm going to put them in the difficult conversation. And then the other ad is internships. Yeah. It's one thing to have this knowledge and learn it in the classroom. Mm-hmm. But if you never get out there and have to do it, it's a hard area to just throw you out there. So we worked with career services and we were like, look, here is the data. There were all these companies creating all these positions. Go find this internship.
Fast.
Right?
You want a competitive advantage, Bentley? Let's go.
I was like, go find us partners. The Center for Women in Business had beautiful partners that they work in. And can I tell you, everybody was like, yes, we will take your students.
I believe
so we do add an internship, or, we know that there are students who have to work for a living and maybe can't add it. So they can do a capstone. But we're really trying to get people to do the internship to get that practical knowledge so they can understand if this is the area they want to go in, they want to, change, anything like that, but getting that practical knowledge. But it was not easy. They were poking holes. And I found that nobody ever gave me, for me, substance, like, except one who was a dear friend of mine, who gave me substantive stuff. Like, I
Yeah.
think you need to bone up on talking about, the privilege and the oppression and things like that in a class. Everybody else, it was, well, we never had a real interdisciplinary major. Shouldn't it be in a certain department? Well, are you sure you want to do this now or wait? Should you go in front of the faculty and have a town hall for this? And you know what I said? Has any other major had to have a town hall?
Right. Exactly.
Well, no, but nothing. I'm gonna keep rolling this over. But I
Yes.
remember that I ended up being one of the people that had to go around and have these side conversations and talk to people to be like, I'm trying to understand what you're saying, but I want you to understand it. I'm gonna fight for this. We're just going to. And
Right.
it ended up being beautiful. It passed, so it has to pass 3 stages. Curriculum implementation,
Yep.
passed, then it has to go to Senate, passed, and then it went to the general faculty, and it pretty much almost passed unanimously there. So
Oh, nice.
it was a little bit, I think at that point they were like, we not going. If we lose
Yeah.
our mind.
Yes.
But it's just so interesting on, I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I think there's certain people that I didn't expect to have such an issue. And I
Yeah.
honestly couldn't figure out, very honestly, if it was they felt like they didn't get included, because people want to put their name on it. And I was less
Yes.
like, I don't care if you ever put my name on anything. This
Yeah.
is not about me. This is not about the other two co-creators. This is about Bentley saying we are a premier business school and we need to start acting like it and being on the forefront of this notion of diversity, equity, inclusion. It is the
Yeah.
number one position that is kind of being hired in the last year or in
Oh, for
2020
sure.
C-suite. What are we doing, right? And that's just
Yeah.
a business case. Don't get me on the moral, right?
Yeah.
There's not
Yeah.
any facet of business that doesn't touch this. And if we keep
Yes.
pretending that it isn't, what are we doing? So
And let me also add this
yes,
as an alum and as somebody that, this work I think is so much more than the job. This work is so much more than the paycheck. It's so much
yep,
more than the four walls that you are going and working with your fellow employees. It is how you interact with the world. You
it is.
cannot, there is no work-life difference. When you are doing again, this is something that I feel like I have to, when I work with clients so much, it's like we have to unlearn the fact that we think we're different people. You are
Right.
still carrying so much either way. And so much of this is acceptance and the understanding of difference. And so
Yeah.
if you are, again, we are in a society that has us all striving to become robots of the
Mhm.
same class, but robots that none of us actually have the capacity to fully become.
Right.
If we create a space in an educational space specifically, because when you're in a college setting or in any kind of educational setting, ideally you're in kind of sponge mode. Your goal is to be learning and to be curious and to be growing. And you have so much that you're learning as you are able to kind of dismantle things that were just given from like before you were even here, just the way things have been done, and
Mhm.
creating a space to actually in kind of intellectual curiosity, but also in the growth. In college, most people are coming into their own one way or another, or learning themselves outside of the place they came from, and giving a space and a spot to be able to not only do that for your own personal growth, but to be able to do that to create the next generation of how we show up in the world and how we
Mhm.
create productive human beings in the world, whatever that looks like, because that might not necessarily be having multiple zeros at the end of your salary for
Right.
you to be a viable person. But the fact that again, the kismet vibe of all of this is that all of those things are showing to be true. All of
Yeah.
these, like so often when I talk about DEI work, I'm like, it's not just about being nice. Like this is yes, and right. Like we're not trying to detach the humanity from things like we've been taught and trained to do a whole lot of stuff. Like don't bring your emotions here. That's for the life part of it. Keep the work
Right.
over here. Instead, what we're saying is actually, if you have the ability to kind of reintegrate your humanity with the work that you're doing, you can be so much more successful. You can be so much more profitable as a business when you're actually allowing people to show up as
Yeah.
themselves and more voices to be in the room. It's not just like a nice to have, and it's also not just like to make people feel good like a Care Bear stare. It's literally good business. And what we're learning, right? Even more so, like the data, again, it's so funny because I'm not a huge data person. Bentley trained me to be a data person. And then
Me
I went
too.
into management consulting space in the private equity world, which data, right? Like that's everything. And I still will never be a data person. I like the trends of data,
Mhm.
and I love it when I have this gut intuition vibe and the data starts coming out and it's saying your intuition here. I'm like, oh my God, thank you for this report. And there's so much information, even in the last year, around the increase in people hiring HR professionals. But those HR professionals are coming in for kind of two main things: the ability to transition into remote work and change how we operate the structures of our businesses so people can actually thrive at work, which in my perspective, that's DEI all day, because you
All
need to
day.
be able to understand how to make it so it works for everybody one
Yep.
way or another. And then the piece of actually things that you actually feel comfortable, confident, and able to call DEI work. Because there's a lot of companies that are like, I don't really want to, again, do we have to do this now? Maybe we should wait till later. And there's huge, I mean, I'm not going to see, not a data person. I feel like there was like a 34% tick year over year. See, it's an Axios. I'll put this in the show notes of HR openings and DEI openings specifically that have happened since COVID started. And so just the idea that, like, if you see, again, I'm thinking about it, like if you see a stock that has the opportunity to has no cliff there, like, why are you not going to create space for that to be something that you have a competitive advantage, because you're actually learning it and you understand that it has the ability to cross so many different lanes. And so from a perspective of like, yes, maybe it makes me feel uncomfortable because to me, DEI, I heard about it on some news coverage that I couldn't relate to, so therefore it's a threat to me. Okay, I can understand if you feel uneducated about it, or it's been something that you've been told, whether overtly or subtly, that we don't talk about that here. That makes people uncomfortable, so we don't do that.
Right.
But then look at McKinsey, like I will send you reports on reports on reports. So you can take that part and like allow, if you're not really sure in your own self, but data makes you feel comfortable, here. There are so many ways to have that bolster that strength, have that bolster that confidence, have that give you a spine that feels stronger to be able to do this stuff, because it isn't as boogeyman-esque as the media has made it out to be, for sure. And so often, as we know, when we are operating in a society, which we are, that it has white supremacy steeped in, and it's funny, the episode that is coming out the week before this one it's all about white supremacy and how it's with a counterterrorism and national security expert that's worked in the White House and blah, 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 blah. So if you listen to that episode, they tie so wonderfully together, because what we have learned so often is that when you start to challenge white supremacy, the pushback that you get doesn't necessarily make sense, but it is something that is so steeped in the way that you've learned that you're so used to shutting down. You're so used to being like, oh yeah, that's what it is. And you don't have access to your critical thought and the nuance that you have and the ability that you have individual discernment. And so I think it is so important for us to be in these spaces where there is this sponge-like quality and this curiosity and this kind of pushing against the things that you thought you knew to be able to become who you want to be, that like it just makes so much sense for it to be in a place like Bentley, in a place that is those 4 years of college or beyond, however long it takes you, the ability to actually be able to dive into this stuff that even when before you got here, maybe you didn't have time and space to do it, to have that fertile ground of like kind of safety and security to be able to stumble and mess up. Because right now, that's where I hear so much pushback in the DEI work. It's like, I can't stumble and mess up. That's like people I'm working with. I can't make myself look, if I'm the leader, I can't come and be uneducated about this. So what, I need to do this on my own, but I can't, I'm uncomfortable. And so creating a space when you are already there is, again, preparing people in a way that like it doesn't exist. And so let me just clarify this, because I've said this out loud to people, but I'm going to ask you, is this the first DEI major out there?
Yeah, so good clarification, because we had to before, so we got a lot of press around it and they were asking. So as far as I can find, there was a major, I think at Virginia, it was around a little bit, but it was, I believe, a major on the arts and science. It is the first business major, yes, that I have found in this country, correct. It is the first business major. And so we launched it, and again, you wonder how it's going to be received. We, like you said, we know Bentley. We know the people we get at Bentley. You know what I mean? Yeah, some of it's still checking out, but we still between about 35 to 40% women. We're not up there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're still in the single digits to certain people of color. So let's, remember that. But, people were really, so the new students, the students leaving, they were like, really?
Yeah.
You doing it now?
I mean,
So
I graduated a long
forward.
time ago, and I'm like, really? Can I come back? Is it grad degree? What are we gonna do? Can I just sit in? Can I just sit in on these classes? Yeah. I'm like, I learned a lot of this stuff, but I didn't learn it this way. I didn't learn it in a way that's supposed to tie you through. It's all self-study so often, and it all is stumbling and watching and witnessing. And if you don't have the space to learn and educate, if your only place of learning was at school, it makes sense to want to go back to school and learn this stuff one way or another.
Yes. And and again, like I said, blessed with race and the law and social justice law, I am watching the journeys. I am watching them stumble. And I am watching they're so critical when they stumble. And I'm like, why do you think you should know this? Why do you think you have to learn? You have to make mistakes. And we have to allow people to make mistakes.
Yes.
Yes, we've been perfect our whole entire life, and we never had any biases that we didn't have to be checked on. Then you need to let people, you know what I mean? If it's coming from not a place of malice, you can correct somebody, but you have to just we can just jump down people's throats really quickly.
Yeah.
And I find my students are so afraid to sometimes say the wrong things. And so I have to create this environment where I'm like, it's okay. I make a mistake every day in my life and I do this work. Okay. And I have to check myself like, you didn't just do that.
Oh yeah.
So, but yeah.
I'm always like, check your pulse. Because if you actually are that perfect person, there's no way you exist, because it's not a thing. It's not real. We are human beings. There is conditioning. That's how we operate. It's like hardwired. And again, this isn't it's hardwired this way, so there's nothing I can do about it. But it's the idea that as human beings, the way that we were, like the prehistoric way, our brain is set up to differentiate things and to make decisions from very far away and to make visual decisions. That doesn't mean we should just keep doing that. It means that we have to understand that and be able to create opportunity to actually be making decisions in alignment with our values. Oh, I'm so excited. So is the first class eligible for this major in school now, or are they coming in next year?
They're in now. So we launched it this fall. I have some people in the major.
Heck yeah.
We launched it this fall. We were now thinking about a minor because some of these juniors, and they're like, come on, we could fit it in. And I'm like, really? So,
they're like, we will.
Yeah, we will. But yeah, so it's launched this fall, and the new curriculum is kind of gonna slowly parse itself in, which allows these students to double major. So we are going to probably see a lot of them take it with probably another business major, but either way, it's beautiful, it's integrated. So yeah.
I mean, again, the marketability of it across the board is just, like, put my business cap on, yes. And just the human dynamic of your ability to show up as a more well-rounded person in the world, next level. And Ben, I will say, I'm biased, acknowledging my bias. Bentley people, we show up because of the Bentley education is very, very tailored to being able to thrive in certain business situations and definitely in the ability to network and connect with people. Add this level of awareness and ability to interact and ability to kind of question things, and also ability to be willing to be wrong and stumble and have the practice and build the muscle of what it looks like and feels like to be like, oops, I messed that up. I know how to take accountability. I know how to be accountable, and I know how to adjust. It's amazing. So anyway, I can gush all day. So, okay. We talked. Okay. One of the questions I'm going to skip because we already talked about it. You gave one. So it's just so funny how the world does this. So you mentioned this before, that before you were kind of doing these official classes around social justice, you were already doing this work on campus in your life. You were a social justice advocate across the board. And so this year, because I'm gonna gush on you a little bit. You just won the Citizen of the Year in your hometown of Sharon, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
I have actually read, before you and I were connected, I actually read a bunch of articles about the amazing work that was happening in your area for sure.
Mhm.
And there was definitely a lot of kind of, at least statewide, if not larger, attention on the work you all were doing. So can you talk a little bit about the work you've been doing locally, and then kind of what a big part of when I, for these episodes, I'm like, people are listening to me like, how can I do that? So how do you kind of recommend for people to show up in their communities, and they don't have to be the citizen of the year in order to do that, but like how does all that work in your view of how you try to show up in those spaces and become citizen of the year? My goodness.
Yeah. So as I told you, social justice advocate, just doing that work all over. So one of the things is when I was moving away from Dorchester, we first moved to Bridgewater because that's where my husband worked. Ooh, Bridgewater is a whole nother. And then I remember having kids that going to school. So I wanted a really good school system, but somewhat diverse, right? So data. You look at data and you're like, okay, you're diverse, but not diverse in certain like so you just got to, when you're talking about a Massachusetts suburb, you're just gonna get what you're gonna get. So we decided to land in Sharon. Beautiful home, beautiful whatever. But I did love the diversity. Like it is diversity as far as different cultures, um, different countries, different religion. And I really wanted, this is the work I do, I really wanted my kids to start learning this at a much earlier age than I was fortunate enough to do it.
Yeah.
Right? Because again, when you're exposed to this, your brain starts to not be, as you just said, subscribed in this way, hardwired in a certain way.
Yes.
So I really wanted that. But as far as diversity of Blacks, it's small, right? So honestly, I'm gonna be really honest with you, Nikki. I was doing this work at Bentley. I was in all these other nonprofits. I was not trying to get involved. I was like, I'm sitting in the school and mind my business.
Can I just be on my
And
couch here? Do I have to be doing
yes,
work here?
I was living my life. I was like,
Yes.
no. And then my daughter started first. She went through kindergarten and all that because they're 9 and 12. And my son gets in kindergarten. So my daughter has always said, like, things have been happening. But I'll be honest, my daughter's a mini me. She is going to walk out there in her Black Lives Matter flag and yell it in her, her pride flag. And I mean, that is her. She is like, no, we're not. And she will speak out. My son is quieter. So my daughter was telling me, well, a friend of mine told me that, somebody wouldn't, their family don't vote for brown people. And I'm like, my car trying to drop off. Like, I don't even know how to entertain this coming. Right. So all this other stuff. Okay. My son gets into kindergarten, and it was a litany of things that happened this 1 week. I first get a call from the vice principal saying he didn't get into anything, but such and such happened. I'm not sure if he told you that they were playing Power Rangers and they told him he had to be the Black Power Ranger. So I'm like, okay. So I talked to him, yeah, and he's like, it didn't affect him. So I'm like, okay. The next kind of day was somebody told him that his skin looked like garbage. Okay. So now, so now my daughter is kind of like, you're hustling on this. She's like, who said that? I don't need you. So
like, you need me to come to kindergarten? I'll come.
Yes.
Yep.
He has eczema, so he attributed to that. Me and my baby girl didn't attribute it to that. Well, here's the catalyst. I get the next call, and it's put me on my behind. Another kindergartner told him, I can't sit next to you because you're Black. They're 5. They're 5. This time I checked on him, and he started bawling. He goes, and I don't, because now he's understanding his Blackness in this world, in this country, right? So we have the conversation, and I'll be honest, I do this work. I do this to talk to my 5-year-old about him and his identity, and that he is going to be othered, and I have to explain that was one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do. So I don't get sick often, knock on wood, but I got sick like ill. Like I was like, I got a cold, I was out. So I am on the couch, and we have these internal Facebook posts for sharing. And there was this battle. There was some like stuff happening at the high school around what is wrong with me? LGBTQIA stuff and BLM stuff, right?
Yep.
And I kind of was ignoring that. Like, I cannot even get into this because I'm going to go off on people. But one thing bothers me, and this is just stemming on me being a professor, where the student was actually just trying to sell some stuff and, give some money out to BLM, to Black Lives Matter or whatever. So she was like, I'm making these things, anybody want to buy it, whatever. And these grown adults, this is a high school, so probably a sophomore, get into this chat and start going in on her. And I had enough. So I went off.
I'm standing between this person and you. Sorry, that is not allowed here. Yeah.
I did a whole damn history lesson, about how you think this country's great, broke down the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Right. You're like, which example would you like? Yes.
Then kind of said what happened to my son, my baby. And the overwhelming response was like, this didn't. And I was like, here's the problem. We are so good within schools. We are so good. Everybody wanted to attack the parent. I'm like, no, you're not. No, you're not going to attack the parent, because I can't even decide if it was a parent or the messaging they're getting from the television, right? Or any other way. And I said, but what I do know is schools and parents, what happens is you will talk about, safe touching and space, but what you never do is teach race to if you don't have to, you don't, but I have to. Now I have to have this conversation with my son, but you never have to if you're white, right? Yep. Like, you can just erase it. And they were like, you're right. So they all went home, started telling their kids, had a meeting with the school, gave them some thoughts on how to bring this in. Yeah. It's K through 5 in that school at the time, how to bring it in. And this started to be the slow trajectory on what you do in your work, bringing it into, kind of the elementary school or the middle school, whatever. So as that continued, Sharon, like everybody, started having this racial reckoning. They wanted to believe they were in a utopia. Mm-hmm. You and I both know you're not in a utopia. So they get into the news because they fired their Black superintendent. They didn't fire the superintendent to that, but they let go their Black superintendent. So now they're in this major issue. And I just started speaking out. Like, I witnessed the microaggressions that I saw her have. Like, I witnessed the amount, nobody was as scrutinized as she was. Mm-hmm. And I really started just saying, we need to do better. You want to live on this fact that you are diverse, but you are not inclusive, okay? Not at all. Let's even get to equity and belong. You are not even inclusive, okay? They're just bodies that you are counting as diversity. So we fought for a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee in the town, this organization. So there's a separate organization that I'm now interim president of. Didn't mean to do that, but interim president called Sharon Racial Equity Alliance. And at this point, I was helping the then president or the founder kind of just help her with all these issues, right? We had the Black Student Union speak out about what they felt like was going on in high school. Anyway, did all that. And we started pressuring our select board and really having conversations with our select board about having a DEI committee, right? We needed a committee on this. If you're spouting diversity, you have it, but you're not addressing it. We get it. They pass it unanimously. I did go out to be on it. I'm like, I was one of the people fighting for it. I go out in the first day we get on this, town meeting. They're like, we'll nominate Kiana as the chair. And I was like, that is not, I said I'd be on it. So ended up to this day being the chair of it. But it is so funny. Again, the work I do was largely, for my kids and then the other kids that were suffering, right? Just in this, like, we have to do better as adults who are teaching these kids who are doing this, but also people who live here, right? This is, there was anti-Semitism happening. We have to do that. So what I think is now being the face of it, people, and I tell people this all the time and sharing, people started seeing either me as on the chair of the DEIC or me part of SREA, Sharon Racial Equity Alliance. I am this face, this safe space where they now are just coming out of the woodwork telling me what's going on. And yes, it is overwhelming, but yes, it is also just saying, look, now you need a town DEI person. Now you need a school DEI person. And no, it's not too much because these things are happening, but people are suffering in silence. They are coping, and nobody should have to cope. So I think that's what it was. I just started taking on all this stuff because it was a hole. It was a
Yeah.
hole. But there are a lot of people who do this work. I always tell them, I just ended up being the citizen of the year, but there is a group of people that I work with that are brilliant, that are
Yeah.
doing this work voluntarily. All of us are doing it voluntarily, because we're just trying to make a better space on where we live. And, is there always more to do? Yes. We always trying to do that? Yes. You know what I mean?
Right.
But yeah,
But
that's just that.
without recognizing the progress, there is
Yeah.
no furtherance of that progress. And so, yeah, that is incredibly powerful. And yeah, I think even I feel like you were talking about just having the conversation in your home, creating a space where it's okay to talk about things that you feel like you've been told you can't talk about, and allowing that to be some conversation with your parents or your
Yeah.
children, depending on who we're talking to right now. It
Yeah.
creates a completely different lens on things. Because again, all of that messaging that your son received, I remember I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, and my father talks about this still, about how kids walked up to him when I was younger and tried to wipe his blackness off his skin.
Mm,
And it was just, and when you have a kid that's doing that, they are learning that through osmosis. Usually you're not telling your 5-year-old those things. They're learning it by witnessing and watching what's happening around them. And
yeah.
that same idea has the opportunity and ability to have that osmosis happen in a different direction. If you actively create a space where it's like, here's how we talk about this, here's how we model these things, then your kids show up in spaces in the way that you want them to be able to show up. Or if that happens, your kids now have had a conversation with you where you said, this is safe and okay for you to address and talk about,
Yep.
then they have the ability to create a different trajectory forward for everybody, rather than it being a reaction to something that was really, really hate filled. But a 5-year-old probably doesn't even understand why they're doing it. They know the feeling of how they got that information. And maybe that is kind of a place of power and privilege as a 5-year-old, whatever those dynamics
Yeah.
actually feel like. But the ability to kind of create this, if we want a utopia, if we're working towards a utopia, first of all, there's a utopia, let me know where it is, I'll book my flight tomorrow.
Right.
But if you actually want to work towards that utopia, there is work that needs to be done. There is discomfort that needs to be had. And there is a level of education that we all need to have, no matter, I was going to say 5, but even younger and above. We all need to create that space to do that. And so I'm so grateful. I don't live in Sharon. And I'm so grateful that you stood up and had that conversation, and you have this wonderful, wonderful coalition of human beings that are working on this stuff
Yeah.
with you, because the movement and the progress that's happening in Sharon impacts everywhere else. At least that's
Yeah,
how I
it
believe, that
does.
we are all tied to each other. So as these things move, we all move together one way or another, whether we know it or not, we're impacted one way or another. So
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for that. And thank you for sharing all that, because I feel like for any of you listening to this and thinking about how you might be able to get more involved on a local level, I really encourage you to think about, like, who are you talking to every day?
Yeah.
Who are your 5 connections, and how can you just even open up a conversation, or even better, share this podcast and have the ability for us to be having this conversation with your friends, and then you can have a conversation about this conversation. So you don't have to
Absolutely.
necessarily feel like the expert. So I'm just so great. Again, your story and your lived experience is an education in itself, which is so important.
Yeah. And right there. Absolutely. Just you know, that lived experience was, and you have to, again, and you can't go in, what I found with any of these, you got to meet people where they are. You got to see, if you're trying to effectuate change, that there is this strategic way you have to do it. So how I had to strategically go around to get this major path, how I had to have a conversation after the committee was created. This is not going to be performative. You thought this was going to be performative. I am the wrong person to be in this. I'm going to make you dig. We're going to dig up trauma. We're going to sit in this trauma, because you have to know the trauma that's happening in order to understand where you're going to try to fix it. So, it is these constant battles. And like you said, you can't separate it. I live it. I wake up with it. It's just everywhere, because DEI is everywhere. Social justice is everywhere, right?
Oh, for
So
sure. We had an episode, it was one of our most popular episodes. It was about social justice awareness. It was in 2019 with Dr.
okay.
T. Williams. So if anybody wants to listen to this, it's a longer one. It's really gonna be but what we talked about was actually one of the pieces that stood out for me was him talking about wealth inequity. But
Mm,
the fact that one of the things that kind of had shifted his perspective was he went to a conference and there was an extremely wealthy woman talking about the harm that our class system has done to her and her ability to be human. So not like I don't
mm,
have money and I don't have resources to be able to participate, but what has happened to my inability to connect with other human beings and the way that I was told how I operate relative to other people took away my ability to
yes,
actually be a full person. And so I think so often when we have these conversations about DEI, we forget, like, so often it becomes about like, okay, the person of color, how do we handle, how do
yes,
we treat this differently? It's like, actually, how is this impacting the people in positions of power and privilege? And how is it disconnecting them from themselves, from the
yes,
core being that they were born into this world to be able to step into that space of? How are we shedding parts of our humanity in order to hold those positions of power and maintain those positions of power and try to be perfect prototypes of what is success and what is power, when it really, unfortunately, so often, especially in our society, power and success equate to you losing yourself. And so how
yes,
do you actually gain that back? You create it so everybody has the ability to exist, because then you are valuable for being who you are and not being like one another. The more we try to assimilate, the less we allow ourselves to
yeah,
exist. So,
absolutely.
oh, okay. So the last thing, I got so many. See, we could talk forever. So, I do one thing I wanted to say, because right now I am outside of America, and the
Yeah,
ability to step outside of America. I'm in Portugal right now and see the things that are happening in America from
yes,
afar, from my, Apple News, when I accidentally swipe when I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh my God, I can't with these sensationalized headlines. I can't do it. Um, it's been really interesting to see and to just bear witness to how people interact differently here. And again, it's like I'm not having deep conversations with people, first because I don't know the language, and second, that was not my intention in coming here. But there is such an interesting experience in witnessing a civilization, feels weird to say, it feels a little bit too broad, but a population that operates outside of the American way and the
yeah,
American systems of oppression that have created the reality that is today. And so I would love, I know you created, I read this because, I researched. I was trying to stop saying stalking when I talk about this. So I've researched and I saw that you have a course that is a social justice course that has a travel component. So can you
yes.
talk a little bit about how kind of that came to be and what the power is of actually learning this stuff and being able to kind of go outside of or go to a new place to be able to see how this stuff works and
Sure, I
actually
love
be
that.
able to wrestle with it?
Yeah. So first, I want you to just note this, being in Portugal and seeing how it does. And I really wish students could go out of America and come back in and see it with the lens that another country would see it. Like
Yeah.
all my students go out and come back because, part of I'll race in the law for a minute is, how everybody has said at this point that race is a social construct, right? But I say, I'm going to add, and it's not just because I'm a lawyer, I'm unbiased, but it's a social legal construct because,
Yes.
and it's specifically race, but I taught everything in social justice. The good news is I could get out of race. You know what I mean? With race,
Yeah.
I do race and law. I keep it social justice. I go into everything. But what I say is, what we always do when we watch these movies or we read this stuff, if let's just take slavery for a minute, we blame the overseer, we blame the slave catcher, we blame all this, and we forget that the only way they were able to do this stuff was mandated by the law. That
For
the
sure.
judges, the legislators, and all of them, that is the only reason why, right? So when I go into social justice was this baby of love because I feel like I'm in this race in the law class, and there's such this intersectionality that I want to get into, but I'm like, there's so much that I have to get through with
Yes.
these so-called races, right? And trying to get them up to speed on just the law, right? So social justice, again, we start off with the UN. So I give that perspective outside. Like we talk about the union, human rights, and
Yeah.
everybody believes, when you talk about the human rights, how many did we get? Did we take them all in America? And I'm like, we didn't. We didn't adopt them all. No country adopted them all.
Mm-hmm.
And then I put up the human rights, and they're looking at me like, you have to be kidding me. We go through LGBTQIA. We talk about women specifically, like, and really get into the nuances of just this notion of this fight on gender equality and gender equity, but then also get some intersectionality. Because in Race and Ally, I talk about indigenous peoples, and indigenous to American indigenous peoples, I actually take it to Hawaii indigenous peoples. And do I not blow these kids' mind when I talk about the
Yes.
population of Hawaii, and they're like, this is mirrored to what happened in the mainland of America.
Yeah.
We go into the civil rights movement, all this. But again, my thing with learning and getting these students is I needed them. Yes, they're learning this. Yes, they can even watch films. Yes, they're reading judges' opinions. But how can I get them as close to these movements, as close to the work as I
Yeah.
can? So I started really looking at it, and I was like, most people don't realize when we talk about the South that Atlanta was a hotbed, right, of a lot of this work. Like,
Oh,
freedom
yeah.
riders went there, right? A lot of this work. And Alabama was Alabama, right?
Yep.
So I was like, I remember where this really started was I went to a conference, and I went to the National Center for Civil and Human Rights.
In
And I
Atlanta?
remember, yes, you
Oh,
been?
oh yes. Woo. I
Life
can feel
changing.
I could feel it. I can feel that experience right now in my body. That was
Yes,
5 years ago, and I can still feel it like I just walked out those doors. Oh yeah.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I go there, and it is not a museum. It is a center. It is an experience. Okay.
Oh, it is.
And
Mm-hmm.
we go there and did that simulation, right? I don't even want to ruin it. Y'all just gotta go. But I did this simulation, and I teach this stuff. And I was in
Loved
almost
it.
tears, right? So
Oh
I
yeah.
come back and I talk to the chair of my department. How can I bring this to the class?
Yeah.
And she's like, you can't. Well, you're gonna create a simulation. So we thought of this travel. And here's the thing with Bentley. Rarely, there was only one other, or maybe two other domestic travel courses running at that time. All the
Yeah.
other ones were study abroad.
International. Yep.
And internationally, yep. So what I wanted to let the students, well, a couple of things. You don't have to go outside this country to see that there is a different lifestyle. Okay. You don't have to. And literally, I remember the last trip I took, we went to Alabama, and there was an international student who looked at me and said, I know this is going to sound weird, but are we in America? And I was like, yes, because we went to Selma.
Mm-hmm.
And we transformed back into the 60s, because Selma's right in the 60s.
Oh yeah.
And we walked that Edmund Pettus Bridge. And I remember the very first year I did it, this Black man, this student, broke down into tears, and I had to hug him. I remember that some of the students got physically, so they did this. I didn't tell them anything. They did it. Half of them got up. But what I loved is they said they sat there in life. They did this in real life. I can sit there that minute and 30 seconds, and they sat back down. So it's kind of just the only way that I can bring them as close, even though they weren't on it. And if we know anything about the civil rights movement, and even the human rights, that movement, or any other disabilities movement, because we go through that, it was younger kids, it was these 20-year-olds who were the foundation of it. We don't talk about it enough, but it was. And I want them to understand that. I want them to know, if you choose, you are the ones that make this difference.
You have power. Yeah.
Changing. I don't think that I knew what this class was going to be for our students. So much so the first year they came back and they asked, KPL, can we do a presentation in front of everybody at Bentley? And I was like, oh, a presentation about what? They were like, about what we learned, because it was so life changing. They were like, we just don't know. We live in our little pockets, and we don't know what the rest of the United States and what people are doing and suffering and dealing with. And they did a full-blown presentation. I introduced them, sat down about each topic they learned, but then they went into the experience on traveling to Atlanta, Selma, and Alabama. And it's life-changing. Then the memorial wasn't open, but we went COVID. We got stuck when COVID hit.
Yeah. Oh, COVID gets you again.
Look, I can usually hold it. I lost it in the memorial. Completely had to take a second my own self, and I lost it. And I just think that is the only way for students to learn and feel, kind of what we talked about. I want you to get as immersed as you can in this experience. And they went into a courtroom. They talked to a federal judge. It's just a beautiful. But that's really what it came down to. I needed something experiential, and this was the best way. And I just launched. I mean, I do everything because we don't have a body that handles this class. Like, it's not, usually for international, I go to the study abroad, nothing domestic because there's only 3
Right.
classes. So I do all the travel, I plan all the things, I'm walking around. And also, though, I'm teaching a class, social justice. I have to remember that certain kids who want to take that may not have an extra $1,200 to $1,500 plus paying for the class to
Right.
pay for it. So I'm going around trying to find these kids money because I know
Yeah.
they want to take it. And that
Yeah.
should not be a hindrance. So
Yeah. Ooh. All right. Well, I mean, every class we talked about, is a 36-year-old alum allowed to come and hang out? Do you need a
yes, you
TA?
can.
What do you need? What do you need? I'll be there. This has been, well, first of all, a delight. And second of all, like the most generous gift. I hope those of you in the audience that are here with us listening to this have been feeling all of the power that I have through this conversation. So KPL, thank you. I appreciate you so
Thank
very much.
you.
I just, I feel like I want to know any new news that you got about this. I want to shout it from the rooftop. So please let me know. I will let the audience know. You're changing the world. I just got to say it again. You're changing the world. So thank you for everything that you're doing. And thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. This has been I loved every minute of this. Thank you, Nikki. I appreciate
Oh,
it.
me too. Me too. Isn't Kiana amazing? Her story hit on so many levels, and I'm hoping that each and every one of you could connect in some way to some of the stuff we talked about today, because I really do believe that experience that we talked about is so incredibly universal. Your contribution, your voice, your experience, and your connection to other people matter so much more than we have been led to believe for so much of our lives and for generations. And so I hope this episode resonated for you. I hope you loved Kiana as much as I did, because my goodness. And I hope if you know anybody who is going into college and thinking about their career and really, really passionate about social justice and really passionate about how to make the world a better place through leadership one way or another, through their leadership, through their advocacy, through their effort, energy, and time on this earth, I really hope you consider the potential of bringing a diversity, equity, and inclusion major into their lives. I say that as a proud alum of Bentley, but I also think that there is such a need for us to create these spaces where we can actually dedicate time, space, and energy to prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Because as I mentioned in the episode, it is beyond just the work that we do. It's the people we are and the way that we live and the future that we contribute to each and every day. So I could nerd out about this forever. As you can tell, we nerded out about it for a while. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I cannot wait for you to come back for next week's.